Hello, it's Andrew from Great Lakes Numismatics, and we're going to start a new video series on the Lincoln Cent. It's one of the most popular coins out there for coin collectors, from the wheat cents all the way through the present shields, and we're going to break this video up into a series, and this is going to be part one. We're going to concentrate on the wheat cents. Now, the Lincoln wheat cent is probably the coin that a lot of coin collectors my age and maybe a little bit older started collecting with. It was, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so we were still finding quite a few of them in change. It wasn't uncommon. Today we can still find them, but it's a little more uncommon than it was back then. And it's still very popular with collectors. It's an interesting series. It has a lot to offer. There's plenty of varieties if you're into varieties as a collector, double dies, and there's some of the most popular rarities also in the series. Now, before we get into too much detail, I'd like to mention a few sources that were helpful to me as I was learning about the coin, and is also a great place to go if you'd like more information than what I can fit into this video here. First place is the official Red Book guidebook to Lincoln Cents, rather, by Q. David Bauer. It's a great resource, and some of the information that I'm presenting in this video, you'll find a lot more details in this book. There's breakdowns of each year in mint, of what to look for in these coins, and goes a lot more in depth than what I can in a single video. So that is a great one to check out. And another source, if you're more into the internet research, is coppercoins.com, and I'll provide a link for that one for you to check out. If you're into varieties, that is the place to go. So it will list just about everything that's known, and for any type of American copper coins, that is definitely a great resource. So the Lincoln wheat cent was first minted in 1909. It was issued to commemorate the 100th birth of Abraham Lincoln, and it was designed by Victor D. Brenner, and we'll get a little bit more into about him and the controversy concerning the design when it first came out. But it was also the first U.S. cent to have our motto, "In God We Trust," on the coin. So back to the initials and Victor D. Brenner. When the coin was first issued, it had on the reverse, at the very bottom between the wheat stalks, it had VDB for Victor D. Brenner. And the mint didn't really have a problem with it when it was first started to be minted and was approved, but there was an issue with the Secretary of Treasury, Franklin McVeigh, and after it was released, he decided he didn't want the initials on there, and there was some back and forth, and it ended up being removed. So what this caused was, one, the major key date in the series, the 1909 San Francisco Mint VDB, and also the Philadelphia Mint is a more desirable coin as well, but it's much more easier acquired than the 1909 SVDB. So partway through, in San Francisco had only minted 400 and, let me double check my number here, 484,000. I keep wanting to say 494, but 484,000 of the San Francisco mints were made. And as of the 2020 Red Book, the prices in there are listed $600 to $1,350. And just remember, if you've seen any of my other videos, I always remind you that The Red Book prices are just a guide that are outdated as soon as the book is published, and especially on key dates and higher grades, the values change quite a bit. So it's always good if you're looking to purchase a coin to, beyond the Red Book, check into like finished auction prices, recent auction realized prices before you invest that kind of money in a coin. Now, they were removed, the initials were removed from the reverse of the coin partway through 1909, and then it was put back on the coin at the base of Lincoln's shoulder on the obverse in 1918. Initially, when the coin was first released, it generated a lot of interest from the public. There were lines of people waiting for this coin to be released, and they had to put limits on how many that one person can get at a time. And there's stories out there, and again, check out the Q. David Bauer book that I mentioned earlier, are stories of huge crowds waiting for these coins and having to have police keeping the peace in where these were being released, especially in like New York. There was stories of paper boys and like shoeshine boys going to get these coins and selling them at a premium because they had the time to go get them and could get a large quantity of them before they start putting limits on them. So that's an interesting fact about the initial release of the coin. But something that also should be noted about the controversy over Victor D. Brenner's initials on the back was, even though Secretary McVeigh was against having them on there, a lot of other coins also had initials on there that nobody seemed to have a problem with. For example, the Barber series of dimes, quarters, half dollars all had initials on it as well, and so it was interesting that Secretary McVeigh had a problem with the initials on it to begin with. Lincoln wheat cent proof coins were initially made from 1909 to 1917 in matte proof. These can be very difficult to distinguish from business strike coins. And a lot of them were initially sold to collectors, and when there wasn't a big demand for proof coins, a lot of them ended up into circulation. And the matte proof aren't like the proofs we see today, where there tends to be more of a cameo and a mirror finish in the fields. This looked very close to the business strikes, with kind of a frosted look to them that kind of became indistinguishable as it was circulated and handled. They weren't in the plastic cases and that like they are now. But there's very subtle differences, and in my research I've found that lots of times even third-party grading companies have a hard time distinguishing them. So if you're interested in early proof coins like these, then do a lot of research on it before you start spending money. And one of the main ways you can distinguish proof of this time from the business strike is looking very closely at the rim. The rim's going to be more squared off as it enters the field, whereas a business strike will tend to be more rounded as compared to the squared off look on the proof coins. Again, in 1936 is when you see the proof coins more like what we're used to seeing today, where they're the mirror finish to them, and that proved to be much more popular with collectors as well. Still, at that time, coming out of the Great Depression, there wasn't a lot of interest in the proof coins. So some of the early proofs can be rather valuable and tough to find. And the next major thing that went on with wheat cents was 1943 with World War II going on. There was a lot of demand for copper, for brass, for shell cartridges, and so the mint experimented with some different compositions for the wheat cents, and they had settled on a zinc-coated steel. So everything you find in 1943 should be made of steel. Now, there are a few what's called transitional pieces, which were basically the leftover planchets from 1942, didn't make it all the way out of the machine and ended up going through the process and ended up in circulation with a 1943 copper cent. These are extremely rare, and they're worth a lot of money, and there's a ton of fakes out there. So if you run across something you think is a copper 1943 cent, first thing to check is it magnetic? Steel is magnetic. And also careful not to scratch the coin with it, especially if it's in an uncirculated state. But if it sticks to the magnet, it is not a copper coin. It is not in any way, shape, or form accurate or authentic. So keep an eye out for that. If you do find one that is copper, best thing to do with it is get it authenticated, send it off to a third-party grading company. If you're not a member, then you find a trusted dealer that is a member of or an authorized dealer of, say, PCGS or NGC, and they can get it authenticated for you and graded. I myself am not a huge fan of graded coins, but in a situation like that, that is the best thing to do, is get it graded on and authenticated so that there is no question about it. Now, the steel cents, they had a lot of problems with these as far as striking, the quality of the coin, and basic wear on the dies. Steel is much harder than copper is, so the dies wore out real quickly, and they only made them in steel for 1943. Going into 1944 and through 1946, you'll see lots of times these coins will be a slightly different color. It's because they reused shell cartridges to make the planchets, and you're not really any premium for these, because you can't really distinguish them real well from another planchet made in other years. So anything from that period you're going to find is made from their recycled shell cartridges. As far as key dates, semi-key dates, and the better dates to keep an eye out for, excuse me, I'm gonna have to look at my list on some of them, but like the 1909S BDB I've already mentioned, the 1909 BDB, that's one everybody wants in their collection. There's a lot more of those out there, like in the 24 million range, so they're not too hard to come by, but there is a premium for them because they're a little bit in higher demand. 1909S is one that wasn't minted in high quantities, so that is one of the keys as well. Like 1910 through 1915, pretty much anything with a mint mark on it is a better date, and keep an eye out for those. Especially the 1914D is another key. It was made in very low quantities. As far as the 1914D goes, be very careful with these. That's another one I'd recommend getting authenticated. There's tons of fakes. A lot of them are pretty obvious, though. One people like to do is altering a 1944 D and basically shaving that first 4 to look like it's a 1. It's usually pretty obvious that that's done, but if they've done a really good job on it, the spacing's still going to be off. And also, like I mentioned earlier, the return of the VDB to the obverse of the coin on Lincoln's shoulder. An authentic 1914 D will not have the designer's initials on Lincoln's shoulder. If it's an altered date, like the 44D, you're going to see the VDB on the shoulder. It's really tiny, and you'll probably need to look under magnification, but it is there. So that's something to look for if you're dealing with a 1914 D. The next one is the 1922 with no D. In 1922, this was during the Depression, where, well, it was more of a recession in 22, but anyway, the only cents being minted at that time were at the Denver Mint, and none were supposed to be made without a mint mark. And they were actually using the dies until they were worn so much that the D wasn't visible anymore. And there's also varieties with a weak D where it's faint, but it's there. To have the key no D, you can't see the D at all, and that's even under magnification. So that is another one that I would recommend authentication on, just to be sure and not spend a bunch of money on something that's actually a weak D or 1922 that somebody has removed the D on. Again, look at these things under magnification when you're considering purchasing a coin of these prices. Also, the 24D is another semi-key, 26S, 31D, and the 31S is another one that is getting towards a key date status. There was only 866,000 of these minted, which, it sounds like a large number, but when you think about most of the others were made in the millions, and lots of times hundreds of millions, and today we're making these in the billions. So yeah, that's a pretty low number, and it's one you're gonna pay a couple dollars for. So those are the main key dates to look for. I'm not going to get into varieties in this video. I'm going to save that for another video, just for the sake of time, and not everybody's interested in the varieties, so I'd like to keep that in a separate video. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about grading wheat cents. And as always, whenever I talk about grading coins, I just want to remind the viewers that grading coins is subjective, that one person's coin says is fine, another person's going to see as very good, and the next person might see it as very fine. So I will try to use the standards that have been around for years as closely as possible. They're listed in the Red Book, as well as pictured in PhotoGrade and several other sources that I've been using for years. And I'm going to try to picture coins that are as close to the description as I can find in my own collection. So I'm going to go to more voiceover and show you examples of different grades and point out the areas to look for. Here's an example of a coin that would grade as good. One of the requirements is that the date be worn but apparent. This one, the date is pretty strong. It can be worn a little bit more than that. This one is very easily read. As we look at the reverse of this coin, you'll see that the lines in in the wheat stalks that they're worn flat. But also something to notice on both sides of the coin is that you have full rims. Now let's look at a coin that would grade in very good or VG8. As you can see on the obverse here, the details are starting to become a little sharper and a little less wear on the coin overall. Then when you look at the reverse of a wheat cent, look at the lines at the wheat stalk heads, and you will see about half of the lines actually being visible for this grade. Now, as we look at a coin that would grade fine or F12, we'll start to see the details become even more sharp, more distinction in the letters. You'll start seeing more of the hairlines in the head, as well as in the jacket. Pretty much all the details would become much clearer. And when you look at the reverse, you'll see that the lines in the wheat stalk should be full. There may be a weak spot here or there, but they should be pretty close to being 100%. Okay, now let's take a look at a very fine or VF20 coin. On this, you'll start seeing separation between the cheek and the jawbone on Lincoln. And this one is just there. You're starting to see the separation. And when you get to the reverse of the coin, you'll notice that the lines in the wheat stalk should be fully complete and not have any weak spots. This coin in particular is pretty borderline. If you can see on the right there is a very small weak spot, but I bumped this one up for my own personal collection. Now here we would have a coin that would grade extremely fine or EF40. At this point, you'll see slight wear on the coin, a little more than what would be almost uncirculated, but all details should be sharp at this point. And you'll notice the kernels of grain will start showing detail as well. And this coin would grade almost uncirculated. And at this point, you will see light wear over the coin and should be relatively even, but all details will be very well defined and sharp. And you'll usually in an almost uncirculated, you will see some decent mint luster as well, which with my microscope is very hard to capture, but this coin does have some nice luster to it. So I hope you found this video enjoyable, found it interesting, informative. Please hit like and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can see all my new videos as they are released. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.